I think we can start. Hi, everyone. I'm Leon Capetas. I'm the external expert for the European Urban Initiative, supporting the Greening Cities Partnership, and helping here coordinate this and moderate this webinar series. Today, this is the third webinar on the Nature Restoration Law webinar series, specifically focusing on building regulations for nature restoration. Some ground house rules here will keep everyone's microphone off, but please feel free to add questions, comments in the chat. We read them as we progress with our webinar, so the speakers who we have today can answer these questions as we go along. The session will be recorded, so please let us know if there is any issue with that, because we would like to post it later and make it public through the Greening Cities Partnership page. Now, I would like to welcome my colleague Heather Brooks from Eurocities, who's leading the specific action responsible for this webinar series, to introduce the series in general and what we've covered up to date.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Leon. Good morning, everyone. I hope you've all got a coffee and you're ready for today's session. So, as Leon said, this webinar series is focused on the nature restoration law, and it's focused on implementation specifically of the urban ecosystem restoration target. So this is Article 8. So this whole series, we're focused on how we can support cities in implementing this target of no net loss of urban green space or tree canopy cover in urban ecosystem areas by 2030. So we're running this series through from March until June, covering various different areas. So cities are having to rethink now urban planning because of the adoption of this nature restoration law. So what are they having to focus on? They're going to have to think about, first of all, the baselines and data that's going to be needed to implement this article. They're going to have to think about their own city plan for how to ensure no net loss of urban green space. They're looking at building and spatial regulations. This is something we're going to get into today. But they're also going to have to think about citizen-owned and privately owned land. In Brussels, for example, 55% of the green space is privately owned. So it's going to cities going to have to think about how to work with citizens and how to potentially get support from businesses also to help fund some of the nature restoration. And cities going to have to be aware of the national restoration plans. How can they get involved in the drafting of this national restoration plan? So these are all aspects that we have been and we will be covering in this webinar series. I'm going to take you through just one more slide to cover a bit what we've already looked at. So if you missed them, we've had 2 webinars already. The first one was really the starting point, so looking at the definitions included within the regulation. We looked at what the baseline years are. So what is the baseline year for urban green space? What is the baseline year for urban tree canopy cover? Where does that data come from? We asked questions like, can cities supplement EU satellite data with local level data? And there are still some ongoing questions there. So these are some questions that the Commission is still working on. In our last webinar, we looked at urban nature plans. So we zoomed in on the cities and really looked at what kind of plans cities are already developing. We looked at the Urban Nature Plans Plus project. So this is something ECLAE is running. They are building upon some guidance and a toolkit that is already out there on the urban nature plan. So this is something that was coming from the Commission. They are testing and improving then this urban nature plan. So testing the guidance and implementation of this within a few pilot cities. And they are looking at kind of integrating then this justice and equity into spatial planning. We then looked also at, we had a speaker from the Ministry for Ecological Transition, and they're looking at integrating kind of conservation and restoration across different sectors. So looking at the rural and the urban area. And there's looking at supporting urban nature plans, again, kind of through mapping and analysis. And then we looked at two great case studies coming from Espoo and from Utrecht. It was really interesting to see the different approaches to developing a city roadmap for no net loss. So in Espoo, they really have kind of one comprehensive roadmap that they are developing for this, Nature-wise Espoo. And they're really we looked at some concrete kind of measures. They're piloting a number of different examples of ecological restoration in 18 different sites across the city. But they also shared some factors for success. So this was political commitment, but interestingly, it was also co-creation of their roadmap with all of the urban environment sector staff within the city. So they mentioned this was a really crucial point to get everyone on board. And also the use of data. So that was also a crucial thing for them to have the appropriate and detailed data within the city. Utrecht, on the other hand, shared some really interesting kind of 3 different interlocking plans. They also talked about the challenge actually of densifying and their commitment to green. But these 3 interlocking plans, that was a green structure plan, a spatial strategy Utrecht, and Utrecht species list. And these 3 work together, covering kind of the structure of green infrastructure, the quantity of green infrastructure, and the quality of green in Utrecht. So it was really interesting to see these different ways that cities are already working. If you missed those series, we'll share the link in the chat box so you can catch up. But then I'll hand back over to Leon to talk about what we're going to talk about today in today's webinar.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Heather. So I'd like to now introduce today's webinar and speakers. It's going to be on building regulations for nature restoration, what it means for the city of Bristol, what it means for the city of Paris. We'll start with Sarah House, who's going to be presenting on their Biodiversity Net Gain regulation. That will take around 20 minutes. And then we'll have a presentation from the city of Paris, specifically from Lea Gratas, who is going to talk about their Bioclimatic Urban Master Plan. We'll take a break after at around 11 o'clock CET, so we can stretch a bit. And then we'll have a presentation from Professor Mattia Leone, Professor of Sustainable Architecture at the University of Naples, talking about not just hard policies, but also the value and importance of soft policy tools. I'm not going to take any longer. I'll pass the floor to Sarah. Sarah, please feel free to take control of the slides, and we can present. We'll start with your presentation.
Great, thank you. Can everyone see that? Okay. So yeah, thank you. As mentioned, I am Sarah from Bristol City Council, who is a Biodiversity Net Gain officer. What I'm going to do is going to run through Biodiversity Net Gain from the perspective of Bristol, a relatively new national requirement and an approach which aims to leave nature in a better state than it was before development took place. So Biodiversity Net Gain approach looks to quantitatively compare the initial site biodiversity value with what a developer is proposing to do on site. The approach is targeted at the development industry because they're a key player in the decline of our already depleted nature within the UK, predominantly England. And by adding this quantitative measure, it allows a set methodology to be applied and an ability to calculate and determine kind of what impact is being had and how we can mitigate for it. So in the diagram that you can see, the top row pretty much shows kind of the typical kind of application of ecology assessment and kind of what was the result of that. The drivers for the site choice and the design was often location, accessibility, topography, maybe the risk of flooding. Those were all factors that were kind of put into play in terms of determining how and where they're going to develop. But now biodiversity is a consideration because of Biodiversity Net Gain and its mandatory requirement. I've seen designs develop which retain more of these ecological features, and the designs looks more like the bottom diagram now, delivering better green infrastructure on site for the benefit of local residents and wildlife, while also, as needed, delivering enhancements off site to achieve a mandatory minimum of 10% net gain uplift. Off-site is an opportunity for landowners to enhance their land for biodiversity and sell these units to developers who need a top-up to achieve their mandatory 10% delivery. So it involves a lot of different players. It's not just the developers alone trying to deliver on this. We've got the local planning authority involved, as well as other site landowners. Another difference in the approach from what was previously kind of standard is that it's secured for 30 years. Typically, management plans were only for 5 years, whereas now we're allowing enough time for habitats to be sufficiently kind of established and deliver the ecological benefits for wildlife and the ecosystem benefits for people. So this diagram is a little bit simplified view of the base of the baseline, of which does not often reflect the sites developed within Bristol, with a much smaller area and much greater population of approximately over, I think, 4,000 per kilometre squared, compared to, in comparison, the 600 kilometre squared kind of like population for the surrounding local planning authorities. The delivery of Biodiversity Net Gain is going to look a bit different in Bristol itself. Because of the densely populated urban landscape of Bristol, although we've got some brilliant green spaces such as the Downs and the Avon Gorge, our base of biodiversity value as a city is low in comparison, however challenging to deliver because of the high population density and continued demand for housing. Therefore, there are challenges, but having a non-negotiable such as the Biodiversity Net Gain is a real benefit to making sure that we deliver within these as we develop as a city. So just moving on to the legislation bit. It's all come from the Environment Act, which then updated the Town and Country Planning Act, which is a series of laws in the UK that form the foundation of how land is used and developed. It has been over a year since Biodiversity Net Gain became mandatory. However, at the moment, I think it's a bit too early to tell what the impact is, because delivering for biodiversity, there is a lag between the planning application and the scheme's development. Prior to Biodiversity Net Gain becoming mandatory, we did have National Planning Policy Framework, which requested a measurable no net loss. So we have been using, we have been practicing with earlier versions of the metric for some time now, prior to becoming mandatory. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the key components that enable Biodiversity Net Gain to be delivered. So we're looking at user guidance, the statutory metric, legislation, legal mechanisms, and ultimately the design of what's being proposed. So the statutory guidance was published in November 2023. We have complemented this with a biodiversity practice note for Bristol to provide further guidance on what Bristol requires as a local planning authority in terms of the assessment of submissions for development projects into the planning system. This enables us to sufficiently review what they're providing to be able to proceed with the development and ultimately approve the scheme they've submitted. It is necessary to have a robust and set methodology so the assessments are fair across the board, with one developer not paying more than another for the similar impacts of biodiversity. So it's really good in that way that we have this set standard that we can and that we have to kind of use to make sure that it doesn't vary between costs for developers. It means that there's a standard approach because there's so much money involved in it now when we're looking at delivering net gain, especially offsite. It's important to have that real set kind of and robust methodology. So along with the approach comes the statutory metric, which must be used. It's a specific Excel spreadsheet which carries out the calculation based on the input that's gained from field surveys by ecologists. This metric is then submitted to planning for review. And I'm just going to go through kind of what that looks like in terms of information that's required to input into the metric. So there's 4 key kind of considerations when we're looking at what the biodiversity value is. Initially, there is the distinctiveness score, which is automatically applied based on the habitat type and represents the rarity of these habitats. For example, modified grassland is often heavily grazed and has low distinctiveness, whereas lowland meadows scores much more highly. As standard, we use GIS software to map each of these habitat parcels to get an area value. And then in the field, we determine condition scoring based on the number of condition criteria passed or failed. In this example for grassland, we are looking for a species composition, which reflects the specific habitat type. If it has varied grass height across the habitat parcel and the percentage of bare ground. The more criteria passed, the better the condition value. And strategic significance is a newly developed kind of approach because we just launched our local nature recovery strategy last year, and that is a mandatory requirement that all local planning authorities had to deliver on. We all have to have our own, and it's meant to represent how we're going to deliver for nature in the wider landscape to create much larger connected landscape delivery, so that species can move through the landscape through joined up habitats. For this, it shows if you've got a site and you're delivering the right habitat in the right place, you get an uplift in value. So to create the baseline, all that's multiplied and you get that value. But then if you're looking at the actual proposed habitats and within the landscape plan, you do the similar kind of approach of what you predicted to going to achieve, but then you're also looking at the difficulty to create and time to target condition. Because the habitat hasn't been created yet, and because that there is a risk and time required to achieve the biodiversity value of the proposed habitats for creation enhancement, they're multiplied against factors which reduce the overall biodiversity value because of either the risk involved or the time it will take to create. So we need to take this into consideration when we are looking at proposals as part of the planning process. And this kind of shapes the habitats we are seeing in Bristol. Because if the habitat is proposed is of high distinctiveness or in good condition, we need to take in consideration the urban nature of Bristol, the population pressure, and the likelihood of these habitats being achieved. So it is limiting kind of what we can deliver in certain areas. And it's also great that it's included because it kind of captures the risk involved and the fact that it's not going to happen overnight and you can't replace like for like in terms of habitat type and area. So to get the final value, the biodiversity value of that site you proposed, you have to add up all those habitat parcels in terms of their biodiversity value, and that gives you an overall biodiversity value for the pre-development, so the baseline value, and the post-development. So you then subtract the baseline from the post-development value to get your net gain, which hopefully achieves 10%. So just looking at the legislation and legal mechanisms that are really important as part of this process. Biodiversity Net Gain is a statutory requirement, which means that it's required by law and therefore a responsibility as a local planning authority that is delivered in line with the Environment Act and the Town and Country Planning Act. To the right, you can see sort of the process that we have to go through and how that is involved in the Biodiversity Net Gain. So initially on submission of the application, we have to do a check to see if they're exempt from mandatory Biodiversity Net Gain or not, to ensure that we have all the relevant information. Not all the applications are required to deliver Biodiversity Net Gain. This includes the sites which impact less than 25 square meters of habitat. This does mean because of the built-up nature of some of the areas of Bristol, there are developments that have no requirement for Biodiversity Net Gain to deliver habitat on site. As a result, with our new incoming local plan, we've looked at introducing the green infrastructure statements to capture kind of those sites that don't necessarily have to deliver on Biodiversity Net Gain, but we still want to see some nature being delivered on the designs. At consultation point, we get an ecologist position on the application itself. So we'll check to make sure everything's been done correctly, that we have achieved the trading rules, that the biodiversity gain hierarchy has been applied, and that we are happy that no habitat degradation has taken place. When we're looking at the trading rules, it's really important because it ensures habitats of similar distinctiveness are replaced with habitats of the same distinctiveness. So in the example we saw before, we couldn't replace lowland meadow with modified grassland. So that's really important to make sure we don't have a degradation, good quality habitats. We also look at the hierarchy, which looks at the consideration of retention and enhancement of habitats on site. So it ensures that those features of value are retained wherever possible and have been considered as part of the design process. And then with degradation, because of the new legislation, we're now able to kind of check to make sure that the habitat hasn't been deliberately or accidentally degraded prior to the baseline assessment being carried out. So although we check everything, and especially at Bristol, we do request that the full assessment and all the information is provided up front, so we can provide feedback as soon as possible and make any changes as necessary. So it's less painful later down the line having to change things. It's best to kind of get in early and kind of have that conversation. But everything doesn't have to come together until the condition stage. So there's a automatic deemed condition that is applied prior to the commencement of works on site. So at this point, you need to make sure that all the Biodiversity Net Gain is accurate and in line with the statutory requirements, as well as being legally kind of secured. So this could be through conditions or Section 106s, which is our planning kind of legal ability to kind of secure delivery both on site and habitat off site as well. So we can secure that 30-year delivery at this point. So an important component of it is the design itself and how Biodiversity Net Gain is impacting how we're delivering our landscapes. So when it comes to features such as sustainable urban drainage, urban trees, it's not classic habitat that you expect, but in an urban environment, they still deliver a Biodiversity Net Gain. And these need to be secured for 30 years. So it's really important to have a multidisciplinary expertise involved to make sure that what's being proposed is actually going to be deliverable for those 30 years. And although we say that it's going to be delivered for 30 years, it's not necessarily the whole target biodiversity net gain value that's going to be in place for those 30 years. It's actually at year 30 that we'd look to make sure that it's actually been delivered, just because obviously if you lose habitat and you're trying to recreate habitat such as other neutral grassland from modified grassland, you then need a lot of intervention to kind of increase the species richness, to manage it in a different way. And you don't necessarily get the biodiversity value overnight. It takes a bit of time to build and monitor and make sure that we're on the right track. So this is why in the first instance, we're looking at the hierarchy, we're looking to retain and enhance where possible, because it avoids that initial loss and that need to kind of build it back up. Because obviously to benefit local people and wildlife, 30 years is a long time to wait to get similar kind of value from your landscape, especially when 10% doesn't necessarily look that much in the grand scheme of things after 30 years. And I just want to look at kind of some of the design process and examples that I've received from looking at applications. So to the left, we have the baseline habitat maps, which informs the landscape proposals to the right. The baseline value coverage comprises hard standing, bramble scrub, and modified grassland. The first iteration of the proposal is shown in the top right, which delivers on other neutral grassland at higher distinctiveness, however more hard standing through car parking and buildings. This design progresses to the image at the bottom right, even though there's not much of a change. You can see in the bottom left of that image, the hard standing has changed to grassland, to just give it a little bit more bump in biodiversity value, but also kind of provide more nature for the residents that will be living there. And just looking at this one, similarly with this application, we can see from the aerial image that there were trees on site. The initial design shown in the middle shows the removal of several trees. At the point of calculation, it was determined that there was quite a loss there and they would need to kind of offset that loss through purchase of units. So they revisited the design and you can see that they've now retained 5 more of the trees and significantly reduced the cost of purchasing additional units to deliver biodiversity net gain. And finally, I'm just going to go through some of the key factors of biodiversity net gain and how we deliver in Bristol and how we're finding it. So some of the good things is that it's very integrated from the development design through the planning process and the actual project delivery and occupation. It's a long process, but it's involves everybody, and I think that's a good thing. It kind of brings everybody kind of into delivering on this biodiversity net gain overall, and it's involves everybody kind of having that input from the planners to the developers to the landscape architects to the ecologists. The fact that it's quantitative, I think, has a huge impact. It enables a standardization in its delivery, and it provides confidence in the assessment to make sure that what you're doing, it can be kind of measured and it can be costed for. It's supported with a lot of guidance and a standardized approach, which is really beneficial to make sure that we can compare delivery of different habitats and designs. And the fact that it's long term is a real benefit, because initially it was only 5 years and then the funding would run out. Because it's a 30-year management requirement and we're looking at kind of who's going to be responsible for delivering it, is money available to provide that delivery and ensure it's costed up front, we can be more confident in the fact that it's going to be delivered and secured for those 30 years. Because of Biodiversity Net Gain, they have brought out ways to legally secure this delivery through Section 106s and things called conservation covenants. So it has been supported through legal mechanisms to be able to kind of ensure we're going to be looking, hopefully in the next 30 years, see a much better habitat in the surrounding landscape. And interestingly, has created a marketplace almost for landowners to kind of say, right, we want to kind of get involved in this and uplift our own biodiversity so we can sell it to developers who sometimes just can't manage to deliver on their sites because of other restrictions, such as the functionality of the site just wouldn't work out, or they just can't get that uplift of 10%. So they just need to buy extra kind of units to kind of push them over the threshold. So it's really interesting how it's not just, biodiversity is no longer just a conservation issue. It is everyone else is getting involved. There's like solicitors, landowners, developers, planners, everyone's getting involved with this and are much more aware of the changes and the necessity for this biodiversity delivery. And finally, I've just included some references that can be accessed, and that might be helpful in terms of understanding a little bit further kind of how we deliver Biodiversity Net Gain at Bristol and in the wider context. And then I've got contact details. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sarah. This is it's been super useful and very, very interesting. We already have some questions in the chat, which it'd be great if you can answer them in the meantime. While Leah and Mattia is presenting, I'd like to use this opportunity to ask a question myself. I have actually 6 questions, but I'll make just one. This sounds very well planned, very well integrated with all the planning processes. Where's the catch? What are the challenges that you have faced?
I think I'm speaking from a year on, so that there's a benefit there, because I think it's taken a year to, share knowledge, share training, get some of the legal mechanisms in place. I think it has benefited from this year of kind of experimenting with kind of what we need to do and kind of sharing ideas. It's really great that as an ecologist working in the local planning authority, we have a network that supports each other in terms of what we've, like, different scenarios we've come across and what they've done and what we should be doing as well as sharing the differences and the different challenges we're facing. Obviously, I mentioned Bristol being a very built up city, whereas I endlessly look at, at the other local planning authorities that have lots of agricultural land that can be upgraded to biodiverse areas. So it has taken a while, but I from my perspective, I think it has become easier. And as people got on board and increase their knowledge in terms of what they need to do, I think it's been embraced a little bit more, and we're seeing better designs up front rather than having to kind of provide feedback all the time to kind of say, oh, if you just, keep this tree or provide more native species, you could get those units up.
Yeah. So how has the coordination with the national government been so far, considering that in Europe, the nature restoration regulation means that national government has to collaborate also with local authorities? How's that connection working for you?
It was very much that the national government set, they provided they provided it in November, and then it became mandatory in February. Although it's been a long time coming, the statutory kind of like guidance wasn't released until November 2023, and it became mandatory in February 2024 for major sites. Everything was set, and then I think it was then the local planning authority's responsibility to see how it's going to work for them. And I think there's flexibility in that, but also kind of very daunting because there's no precedence, because we're kind of like, okay, well, how are we going to, have a Section 106 set up in terms of agreement for biodiversity delivery offsite? Where are habitat banks when we've got developments coming through? They're asking us where they can buy units from, and the market was just developing. So it's been very interesting kind of how we've adapted kind of the information provided and kind of what we've been doing with that. The government obviously provided ongoing kind of like clarification, updates to the versions, like minor updates just to kind of clarify kind of the approach when they've received feedback, and provide funding for local planning authorities to kind of start delivering on this biodiversity net gain, because it is a bit resource heavy when you've got another thing to kind of like assess when you've got a planning application, and you've got a lot of training and time taken away from doing your day job to kind of like train yourself up and deliver on that.
Great. Yeah, I see. And one final question. I'm abusing my role as a moderator here, but technically speaking, who holds this information? Is there a cadastry, and what's the responsibility to share with the public, with external stakeholders, so that you can have transparency and accountability as well?
So in terms of actually the planning applications and us looking at them to see kind of what they're delivering on, it goes through the planning portal. So that is a discussion that's being had, where we would like more transparency and more of this data coming together to kind of look at what's being delivered, because it's standardized and because there's so much kind of information out there because of this methodology. There is so much research we could do on it as we go through the years, because it's across England and kind of what we're delivering, we can see kind of how it's going to progress. So we would like to see a bit more transparency and bringing together of this information. It is through the planning portal, which is open for people to comment on, but because of the stage that it's brought in, which is pre-commencement stage, and the fact that it's not a standard condition, it varies between local planning authorities, I think, in terms of kind of how accessible it is, this information. So it does sit kind of like within the planning process, but it's not necessarily kind of gathered and kind of like processed as far as I'm aware. What we do have for offsite delivery, for those landowners wanting to uplift their biodiversity, we do have a register with Natural England, who hold a platform where you can you have to have a legal agreement, but you can then kind of like post your uplift of biodiversity units on there to sell to developments. So that's recorded. So it means that any of these sites that are secured for biodiversity net gain can't be developed on for 30 years because they've been registered. There's no kind of hopefully no kind of misinformation where it's then put up for development the next year. It needs to be secured for those 30 years, which is why we have that register.
Of course, yeah. Great, thanks, Sarah. I think I'll type with the rest of the people my remaining questions here on the chat. I'd like to move on to the next presenter. Leah, it'd be great if you take control of the slide deck. And you can talk to us about the Bioclimatic Master Plan of Paris. I see some I expect there are some connections with what Sarah just presented. So yeah, great to hear more.
So thank you, Leon, for giving me the floor. My name is Leah, and I work at the Urban Ecology Agency for the City of Paris, which is part of our Green Spaces and Environment Department. I would like to add that we are also involved in the UNP Plus program, which supports cities in developing nature plans in line with the NRR law. And today's presentation will focus on the Bioclimatic Urban Master Plan of Paris, which is a key component of cities' building regulations aimed at supporting nature restoration. The presentation will be structured around 3 key points: the context of Paris, the Bioclimatic Urban Master Plan, and biodiversity. And the last point will be on how we support project leaders. So let's begin with some context. As you know, Paris must adapt to the growing impacts of climate change as the city is increasingly exposed to heat waves and episodes of intense rainfall. So one of the main challenges relies on adapting the city to its high-density urban environment, which requires a fundamental rethinking of urban planning strategy. In response, Paris has developed a coherent set of plans aimed at addressing climate change. And the cornerstone of these efforts is the climate plan, which outlines the city overreaching guidelines and ambitions. All the other strategies and planning documents align with this central framework. Today, we will be focusing on one specific plan, the Bioclimatic Urban Master Plan. And this plan is particularly important because it is legally binding. It is a legally binding document mandated by the state, and it incorporates local considerations and plays a key role in regulating urban planning and construction within Paris. So just let's take a moment to clarify what is a master plan and why it's important from a regulatory perspective. So a master plan, known in France as the Plan Local d'Urbanisme, is a mandatory urban planning document required for every city or group of municipalities in the country. It represents the overall vision for development and urban planning at the local level, and it defines the rule governing land use and construction. The master plan is both a spatial and temporal translation of a territorial project. And what I want to emphasize is that all construction and development initiatives must comply with the master plan in order to be granted a building or development permit. And the master plan is, of course, designed to align with broader intercommunal, regional, and national planning frameworks, ensuring consistency across all levels of territorial development. To focus on the Parisian master plan, the new one was voted really recently in November 2024, and the main axes are, we have 4. The first one is enabling everyone to find a place to live in Paris. The second one is adapting Paris to meet the ecological emergency. The third one is a new way of thinking about buildings. And the last one is a bioclimatic master plan for the city of the quarter hour. So what we can observe is that the main the main guiding principles of the Parisian master plans fully integrate the notion of ecology and nature. The plan is designed to weave these themes throughout the entire document, ensuring that ecological conservation are embedded in the urban master plan. And as we will see, this emphasis on urban ecology is merely aspirational, and it's clearly articulated in the plans and carries binding force for both residents and project developers in Paris. So the notion of nature and biodiversity is reflected in the urban master plan in three main ways. First of all, an overall strategy. The second point is the protection of green spaces and trees. And the last one is a regulation in favor of biodiversity. So the overall strategy set main objectives adapted to the Parisian context, such as strengthening the policy of protected green space, creating approximately more than 50 hectares of new green space in Paris, and the creation of 10 parks is also to create a major metropolitan park in the north of Paris. It's also about desilting 40% of Parisian public space by 2050, and also encouraging the greening of buildings and courtyards. So this overall strategy is translated also into a spatial document that outlines the main direction of the city's approach to nature and biodiversity. What we can observe is a strong focus on strengthening and connecting green and blue corridors with the aim of increasing their presence, improving the continuity, and enhancing their ecological impact across the city. The guidelines of the master plan are designed to incorporate the challenges of biodiversity loss into land use, public space design, and private sector development. The overreaching goal is to strengthen the role of nature in the creation of a city more resilient to the impact of the climate change, particularly by promoting the creation of cool islands wherever it's possible. So, as part of this broader strategy, a key priority is to preserve existing natural environments under the best possible conditions. In Paris today, these existing sites are considered especially valuable as they already host well-established ecosystem. And it offers great benefits for biodiversity. So while we continue to protect all the identified area, a significant efforts have been made to identify new species, particularly within private properties, and to include them into the list of protected zones. So the area in red on the map is the new protected area, or the new protected area. So here are some examples of protecting green spaces, and as you can see, there is a wide variety of stakeholders involved in their preservation, from condominiums, social housing, and also institutional sites. So now we're going to look at the main regulatory measures that applies to anyone planning to build or renovate in Paris. These rules have evolved significantly between the previous master plan and our new Bioclimatic Urban Master Plan. As illustrated in those images, building surfaces are limited in order to preserve a portion of open ground space on each side. So the open spaces are defined as a percentage of the total plot area. And so what you can see on this image is the before and after comparison, highlighting how the revised rule prioritizes green and planted areas. So project developers are also required to meet new requirement for trees, and the logic is in 3 points. The first one is to avoid cutting down existing trees. The second one is to reduce the number of trees you need to cut, but also to take care of the environment of the trees. That is to say, you must build at a safe distance from its roots and foliage. And so we ask the project leader to compensate the number of trees that have been cut down. And another tool I would like to highlight today is the Greening Building Index, and it applies for all new construction, major renovation, extension, or building elevation. So this index is a tool to green the building. That means you have to calculate this index, and this show you how much surface of greening you must add to your building. You can you can green the facade or the roof, for instance. So as it's a new tool, we don't have yet a great deal of experience with this measure, but we do know that it's really help to think the project owner to develop the project into a bioclimatic conception. So now that we've seen that the urban master plan is demanding, the question is how to get all the stakeholders involved in planning to go into this urban master plan. So first, I would say that there is 2 drivers for action. The first one is to have an exemplary municipality, and the second one is to support and engage the private sectors and semi-private sectors. So for instance, we in Paris have an objective to green our municipal facilities, and the target is to green more than 200 new equipment. So the goal is to also become experts in greening building and facilities, so then we can share our technical expertise and also show to private and semi-private sector that greening building is doable in Paris. Another way to support the private sector is to create a set of tools and resources. First, we create a platform online. So this is the example of the Green Roof and Wall webpage, and it provides general information on building greening. And this serves as an accessible first step for anyone interested in the topic. We have also developed a tool designed to encourage building design that minimizes the negative impacts on biodiversity. So this tool is known as the biodiversity scores. It functions similarly to a label, with the objective for new constructions being to reach class A. And the score is based on a comprehensive evaluation and strongly encourages the greening of buildings in order to achieve the highest possible rating. While the biodiversity score is currently a voluntary measure, it serves as an important incentive and guidance tool for promoting more nature-friendly urban development. We also support the greening through financial incentives in order to encourage all stakeholders to take action. Here we'd like to highlight the role of social landlord. Since 2022, we've implemented dedicated funding mechanism to support the creation of island of coolness, and the program includes the greening of roofs, walls, as shown on the photo on the slide. And this initiative has proven highly effective. Over 10 hectares of green buildings have already been created within the social housing sector in Paris. We also provide support to more local actors, such as co-owned properties, through dedicated investment subsidies. This aims to encourage actions such as depaving, water deconnection, and the creation of green open spaces. Another financial mechanism to support greening in the private sector is a program called Eco-Rénovons Plus. And through this scheme, the city can provide subsidies to property owners under certain conditions, such as carrying out comprehensive audits, energetic renovation works, and environmental improvements. And so these subsidies also cover green roof installations, for instance. And the image on the slide illustrates the type of projects supported by this program. And it's important to note that this initiative is not limited to municipal fundings. It also benefits from national level support provided by the states. And so thank you for your attention. And if you want to go further, there is some links on our Bioclimatic Master Plan, but also all the tools we developed to help project leaders to build their future project. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. It's impressive the work that Paris has been doing with this Bioclimatic Master Plan. I think we can take some questions in the chat a little bit later, but please feel free to type them in for Leah. There have been some questions for Sarah, which she's been answering, I can see. Leah, I have a quick question before we jump into the break. I assume you have a very good inventory of trees and their health condition in order to be able to make these assessments. Is this correct?
Yes, it is. We have a database that our team in charge of the trees is currently updating in order to have those data on trees. But we have to develop our private sector data on the trees a little bit more.
Yeah. And you also mentioned that big part of the new green space that you plan to develop are private. How do you collaborate with these private landowners?
We do have different mechanism to collaborate with private owners. We do have big private owners, such as the railway company that develop massive projects. So we do have space to negotiate with them, also because they are legally binding with our urban master plan, but also with regional and national regulations.
Great, thank you. Let's take 8-minute break, 7 minutes break now, and come back. Let's get a coffee, stretch a bit, and we can continue at 11:05 with Matthias' presentation. But in the meantime, please feel free to continue typing your questions in the chat. Thanks again, Leah.
Thanks.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you managed to take a nice break. We can continue now with our third presenter, last but not least, Mattia Leone, who's going to be talking today more about how soft policies can play a role in greening cities effectively and meeting multiple targets across different policy areas, from heat action planning to climate neutrality. So, yeah, Mattia, looking forward to your presentation. Please feel free to take control of the slides.
Yes. Thank you, Leon, and everyone for the invitation. Yes, and also I'm here a little bit to talk about this gap, which is also part of the title. We've seen incredible example from UK and France on how the evolving nature of international European policies is actually landing in regions and cities, delivering a whole new set of tools, guidelines, policies, and regulation for support. There are a few complexity that, for example, my regions and my city in the southern Italy, and in general, several regions in Europe are facing, especially when it comes to the hard regulations, but in general, the going after the evolution of directives and of norms. Some of them are more institutionalized and part of the nation to region and city stream, while others are requires a more coordinated effort to deliver the expected result. The focus on a changing climate, it really comes from the experience of our work with several cities in Europe and globally, but in which only recently we are able to connect effectively the dimension of ecosystem health and, of course, of social justice and spatial justice. And this is also luckily now supported and backed by the latest IPCC report, where the big work on climate change adaptation and in general disaster risk reduction in a multi-hazard perspective, which has been progressing a lot and helping to frame the climate crisis in alongside with a more general issue about resilience, together with other pressing issues at global and local level. This is important because in the past 10 or to 20 years, local context, cities, regions, and national states have been working a lot on climate change, and they produce a lot of effort. So we believe that connecting and integrating policy dimension, it's of utmost importance, especially to not create another bunch of rules that the city needs to follow and that could appear as disconnected from other frameworks. So there's a lot of effort in connecting all these issues that relate to climate, environment, and society through complexity approach, accepting the complexity that is underlining the need for pushing even more the boundaries of local capacity to tackle this challenge in a holistic perspective. The understanding of cities as a complex social, ecological, and technical system requires also to have a less linear approach and solution-driven approach, but really carefully look into local complexity and find suitable solution that respond to even to local challenge. When we work with cities and when we say the wording like meet cities where they are, it really means to look which is the specific and unique condition and the cities struggling and piece of work in the direction of meeting this challenge and meeting the ambitious goals, because we are of course talking about European regions. When we come to the role of urban design and building design, this complexity, which requires dynamic approach, systemic understanding, connecting between social, environmental issues, value proposition around the benefit of climate resilient development, which is finally understood as an approach that integrates mitigation and adaptation to climate change alongside with tangible impact on socioeconomic and environmental benefits for local communities, including non-human communities, and the integration of system. This becomes overwhelming challenge, especially in a traditional, let's say, professional dimension, such as the one of urban design and architecture, which are sometimes ingrained in their consolidated disciplinary background, which sometimes is hardly being updated with novel capacities and focus. This is a part of a report that we periodically publish as part of the UCCRN network, and that is focusing on the many issues that we do care about when it comes to climate resilient planning that also speaks to society and nature in a certain way, which is a connection across different scales of planning, from regional to local and building planning, in a systemic perspective where critical urban systems that are major drivers of emission are also understood in their relation with the impacts of climate change, and that this could provide also disruption and cascades across socio-ecological and technical system, and also trying to help to orient the practice of planning and design with a more tool and knowledge-oriented and science-supported way of working. We've seen incredible example in the previous presentation, and we need more and more to connect those in a capacity building that it's really connecting different dimensions. So we have the national level, which is the one that can actually deliver the more tangible effect on let's say actual indicators that show the level of achievement of the ambitious goals that were set for 2013 and 50. But this goes literally, of course, at the level of the single local authority, but even more of the many practitioners that are called to bring into action the novel policies and also the more and more well-established strategic plans. This means that cities are already surrounded by a clear set of policies, which sometimes are evolving even really fast and connected to vital funding for their implementation. Science and technology, which can provide and advance capacities, but also on different levels of pressure from communities, in which I would also include ecological systems that supports human life on Earth and in cities in general. If you have to look on why do believe, and of course we need our regulation, we need binding rules, but there are several conditions in which we also need soft approaches that work to drive stakeholders and communities towards the acceptance and also awareness of our regulation, interconnection, and relevance. Here are just a few examples. And of course, one of the critical aspects that I believe that soft regulation can help with is exactly this systemic framing of planning and design issues, rather than a siloed approach that risks to separate, for example, the energy local plan from the biodiversity plan. In well-established context, we are seeing this integration happening. In other contexts, we are seeing this siloed approach that do not help integrated development and also the ultimate final quality of project. When we talk about tools that supports the urban nature restoration and nature-based solution design and implementation in cities, of course, urban nature plans, but how they fit as a new tool with pre-existing and how they do not become another plan that cities should follow, which can become a real burden in many contexts. For example, connecting with SECA planning, which are much more established in connection with Covenant of Mayors, and of course, all the city planning rules that are evolving and together, as well as local building code and regulation. Then the case of indicators, we are seeing how this needs to be much more tailored with specific context and local needs, and with the relevant granularity to support building to neighborhood scale design. And in this, we also need to connect with communities, also potential key actors in monitoring and assessment through novel monitoring frameworks. In general, co-design is, of course, emerging as the only effective way of designing and pushing architects and planners to engage with communities, not only and stakeholders, not only when city officials and local authorities are into play, but also as a daily and practice that is needed to deliver this effect. Then I will make a point on the Napoli case and how, in this complex context, we are trying to connect the soft policies with a different approach to planning and implementation of action. You see here, I mean, critical conditions that are peculiar to many contexts. I would not restrict those to Napoli, but the problem is for sure not only the resources. We have had plenty of them, but it's a low spending capacity, which it's really much connected with the weak technical and administrative capacity. So this is not a major focus that is actually limiting a lot the implementation capacity in our context. On the other hand, the limited private investment, which is more where in other contexts is also at risk of a greenwashing practice that needs also to be prevented. So like trying to find a balance between profit making and actual need of local context. But where private investments is lacking, there's a less culture. This is even more needed because it's a lot in the hand of public sector to drive and boost the action. And other issues related to non-complying with regulation, with illegal practices that are still forming an important part of activities, with the problem of lack of control. What we did, and we believe it could be a way to create a framework for capacity building, it's really a stewardship city throughout, in this case, for example, European project, in connection with a strategic planning that helps creating a sort of an umbrella to work on policies. I will then conclude here showing what we actually did. This is, for me, these 3 points are always at the center of the activities that we do in supporting cities in their mission for climate neutrality and adaptation, which is also looking at the practice of urban design and architects and planners, and give them actionable tools for both evidence-based and assessment of project solution, and also engagement of communities and stakeholders, and on the other hand, supporting cities to deal with the plurality of initiatives, from small scale to big scale projects and implementation that are become a burden themselves when it comes to assessing their cumulative effect in delivering, for example, green infrastructure, restoration, or increasing energy efficiency and reducing related carbon emission, for example. So there will be a few slides that show how we are developing tools specific to the city, open source to any practitioner that wants to apply. Of course, everything starts with having a pretty strong and public data sets that it's a backbone for any action. This needs to respond to multiple scale needs. So from a planning scale that it can be effectively handled in GIS to a more detailed scale that can be worked out with 3D modeling. It means inventories of trees. It means attributed values to building open space to understand then which is their potential in delivering multiple benefits. We are looking here on how this system allow a dynamic and multi-scale assessment, for example, in this case of heat scenarios under climate change. On the other hand, by working on other kind of publicly available data set, these data are used to build strong narratives. And this is an example made exactly on the focus on nature. Through these images and satellite and elaboration of satellite images connected to the GIS data set, we are making a point on how we cannot talk about nature as it is. It's actually a living material. And where we need to understand that it's not enough to plant trees around, because there are issues related to a changing climate that requires intervention to be balanced. We're talking here about irrigation need, maintenance need, and specific species. Of course, you can see a distance between what we're seeing in Paris, and this is a piece of path that not only Napoli, but many cities need to do, despite, of course, the knowledge that is around, but how this is institutionalized, it's another issue. So we are pushing a lot for the need of interdisciplinary teams working with architects that are still a bit far from a full understanding of ecological dimension connected to their projects, whether urban or building scale. Then looking at what the city is doing and try to cluster and to create projects database that are connected to KPIs and in which the strategies can be understood also in its development over time. Multiple projects of different scales can contribute simultaneously to a unique goal. And this is why both each single intervention must be assessed to their capacity of delivering benefits, but also how cluster intervention of different size in their integrated vision can actually deliver, for example, the targeted result. And here we are seeing a plethora of projects working on a single area that we assessed could effectively contribute to the heat island reduction and heat stress reduction. In general, what we think should be enabled is to have a dynamic scenario comparison. Multiple projects could be assessed to support the strategic planning and then give a guidance to a more detailed design. When it comes to supporting the building to neighborhood to building scale design, this is another set of tools that help to build a taxonomy of components related to building an open space that directly deliver the indicators that, for example, in the SECAP are part of the monitoring and the assessment of the overall plan. But on the other hand, we know how this, it's only a strategic and planning phase that then goes into the public tender. And this is another big divide between the strategic planning level and the actual implementation. In this, we are increasingly connecting to another category of soft tools, which is the green building protocols and the voluntary certification system, because they are the initial hook to which private investment are increasingly understanding the value proposition for green building. So we wanted really to not create another framework, but rather to align the city framework with the most prominent system, and a translation of key indicators with respect to the nature of categories from the second planning: emission reduction, adaptation, spatial justice, habitat and diversity, providing guidelines and explaining how these should be all integrated in the BEAD assessment. So the BEAD is also one because of the increased capacity of adhering to much more ambitious standard for green building. And finally, a part which is a constant of the work is to enable space for co-design, identifying challenges and vision done with stakeholder and helping breaking the silence between administrative department that is the norm on our side, creating vision that resonate with actual activities that are underway, again, providing another support to this clustering and helping creating dialogue between city departments, which is a major issue identified, but then going to the ground and getting knowledge from communities and mapping their needs and priorities, again, in the same set of tools, contributing to an increase in knowledge that then goes into this GIS platform that it's openly available. This requires also that technical side of our work becomes more understandable, and that the point for green is also connected to other value proposition and also resonate with what are political claims about city vision, for example, that are also very much connected to most of the financing that we cities are looking. And also looking a different way of how nature is always in the cities. Even in the more infrastructure part, we are dealing here with the specificities of the coastal cities and how sometimes this hidden nature is actually providing our backbone for green and blue infrastructure continuity. Translation of strategies into concrete plans and connecting those to even transformative visions. You are seeing also part of educational work that we try to do, because again, coming back to the systemic challenge that we saw a little bit at the beginning, I don't think we have all the solutions yet. And I don't even think that a clean application of best practice is by itself able to deliver these ambitious results that we are targeting. We actually need that architecture, building design, and urban planning and urban design deal with such a complexity, also with their creative, let's say, potential. In this sense, I don't see a contrast between hard and software regulation, of course, but I really see in many contexts like ours, soft regulation as a gateway to understand why hard regulation are an example or are the actual need that should be established, and why only these further and more common and widespread connection to binary regulation is a key to unlock this targeted benefit. At the same time, climate resilient development cannot be split into multiple regulation. So we need to help and increase capacity in understand the interconnection that at European level exists and between these directives, but sometimes are lost when these are translated into sectoral hard regulation. So there is a lot of work to do in helping cities to systematize their action in a more coordinated way. And yes, this is the beginning of a challenge, but we also can learn a lot for more established contexts in which, as we have seen from the example this morning, this seems to be much more than a reality. But on the other hand, needing to come together in the context where this is not a reality yet and must become for the future to connect to this European vision that we all share. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mattia, for the great presentation. I can see that coming from this more academic research point of view, you're able to make these interconnections between different policies and offering tools for policymakers, decision makers is vital in order for them to operationalize it. So one particular slide you had there on the green and blue city, the carbon city, the circularity city, and there was one additional dimension I don't, the 15-minute city. So yeah, so many targets, but one single space. So you need to work quite creatively through this soft regulation or including tools to make that possible. And make these synergies rather than strengthening trade-offs, if I can put it like this. Thanks again. I think it'd be nice to open this now to the audience. I see many questions in the chat. There have been interesting discussions taking place there. Please feel free also to share now more questions for Mattia as well, now that you've seen his whole presentation. What I could do now, I'd like to do now, is take some of the questions in the chat that I found particularly interesting. So here, Heather is asking whether, specifically to Sarah, regarding distinctiveness, if the focus is on specific on species type or abundance, if Sarah could share a little bit more information. So distinctiveness is determined by an ecologist on site and typically applies to common and easily created habitats such as species poor grasslands, for instance, a football field or heavily grazed fields, or urban features like rain gardens or introduced non-native shrubs. Another question, which I think it was in many people's mind, who is responsible for the delivery in 30 years of this biodiversity net gain? The responsibility for delivery is stated within the biodiversity gain plan. However, the requirement to deliver and manage the habitats is always with the landowner. So if it was sold, whoever purchased the land would be required to follow the management plan. So that's interesting. Now, one of my questions to Sarah, I'm reading out. Maybe some of you have already read some of these questions and the answers. If habitat connectivity is being considered in biodiversity net gain, in previous versions it was included, but it hasn't worked out sufficiently and has been removed for the time being. Don't know if Sarah, you want to add something here?
Yeah, it was like an additional consideration when we've looked at the distinctiveness, the area, the strategic significance. That connectivity was another kind of component of that. And I think they tried to join it up to mapping and kind of like trying to deliver it. So it was in the minds of like when we're looking at the value of biodiversity, is it connected to the wider landscape? Mm-hmm. It was in consideration of kind of like, this is part of the value of it, but I think it was determined that it was just a bit too complex. It wasn't quite working how they wanted it to do, and they're trying to replicate something that's easily kind of like used. So they ended up removing it. I think it was version 2 it still existed, and then after that it got removed. Yeah. And then we're on version statutory metric is after version 4.0, so there's been a few versions in between that one and the current one.
I guess this kind of reinforced the message for the need for this hard regulation and softer regulation, like the work that Mattia presented, saying that soft regulation is more flexible and it could account for this type of considerations that a hard rule doesn't have the ability, to measure and implement. Specifically, when you have all this fragmentation of land ownership, it's very hard to implement this higher scale, ambitions. Mattia, any comment on that?
Yeah, well, on this is exactly one of the points. I believe that this soft regulation can actually help even to test and in new indicators it can become tricky, or at least in our context it is, because making a binding regulation opens a lot to other kind of trials and issue in terms of legal. And that is why some issues which are fundamental are not directly translated into law, because it's very delicate point there. And this is exactly the added value. If the soft policy is an enabler space, then it's also where we can start testing the effectiveness of this kind of tools and other indicators, making them, viable and useful for assessment while not creating legal issues that could be connected to that. So that's one of the point. And then if they are validated enough, and I think this was also the case of some of Paris, because I know very well the great work that has been done on biodiversity lately in the last 15 years, they can become part of a regulation. After a validation happens also through implementation. That's one point, making more and more validated, even novel approach to this towards this systemic thinking.
Thanks, Mattia. Sarah, any reflections?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think we're able to bring in connectivity as a concept when we're looking at these applications and saying, right, you've placed these trees here, but can you not kind of move them over to this boundary over here so you can add to the habitat already existing and create that connectivity, and just kind of, it's a more softer kind of approach, but that makes a big difference. In the Biodiversity Net Gain user guidance, it does say that it needs to be ecologically functioning. And to me, that's, you need it connected, otherwise not all wildlife are going to make it to this isolated patch of habitat. Even though you delivered units, it doesn't necessarily going to deliver all the ecosystem benefits and wildlife benefits that it could do.
Absolutely. I noticed that one of the principles for implementing the net gain regulation, the first one says, filled in by a competent person. That's something
an important one.
So yeah, the people that work on these applications, planning process, and so on need to have the skills and understanding. So I guess it creates also a new, I'll call it a business opportunity, but it creates a new market for ecologists, right?
It does,
so new skills.
Yeah, there's ecologists now that specialize in biodiversity net gain because it's, so sought after now, and there is a specialty to it in terms of, because there's so many different nuances and different kind of scenarios that could occur. It's really good to have an ecologist that has a lot of experience using it, so they can kind of quickly, adapt or kind of understand the legislation. So it definitely does upskill or change the skill sets of certain ecologists. But I think with, other industries as well, when they're getting the hang of biodiversity net gain, they kind of work with it a little bit more, and kind of it's definitely changing kind of people's skill set, I think.
Absolutely. And one more for you, Sarah. It's been in the chat, and I think many people have this question. I had this question when we first met. How are offsites chosen? And you did answer there in the chat. Does the on-site landowner have a saying at what offsite targets he or she can focus on? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so in terms of the delivery offsites, if the landowner themselves will look at their site and kind of where their potential is for uplift. They'll get an ecologist kind of consultation and kind of see, right, if it's not delivering for agriculture, if it's not, valuable in that sense, it's not got high nutrients and to deliver crops or used for grazing, then it could potentially be used for biodiversity net gain delivery. And from the other side of things, when you look at a developer looking to kind of where to purchase those units, there's a lot of platforms that have appeared that kind of promote where you can purchase units from. There's new businesses that have appeared that kind of facilitate that delivery. And what we're looking for is as close to the impact site, is how we refer to it, as possible. So it's a bit blunt, but in the tool itself that I didn't quite go into because I didn't want to delve into too much detail, there's a penalty applied. So if you purchase units outside the local planning authority or national character area, you get a penalty, so you have to purchase more units. And then if you go further afield beyond your neighbouring local planning authorities, you have to then purchase the units at an even greater kind of penalty. So there is that kind of like subtle requirement to kind of deliver as close as possible.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned here also that regarding the 30 years to deliver the 10% net gain, there are some midterm reviews, specifically in the first 5 years. That's where you find the highest the risk is, right?
Yes, yeah. So especially with trees, you know, when they're just becoming established, as long as you've got the right tree in the right place, the risk is a bit lower, but like you don't know for certain until it's 5 years down the line and it's you know, it's happy and content, it's healthy. And other habitats, you know, you can use your expertise and professional judgment as much as possible to know that you provided the right seeds, the right kind of like species, you know, to deliver the habitat that you need for 30 years. But you don't know if those first 5 years are really critical to make sure that, you know, it's been established and it's going to be successful. So we ask for a bit more monitoring in those first 5 years just to make sure everything's on track. And then we can be a bit more relaxed and just have a check-in every 5-10 years, depending on the habitat delivery, to make sure it's on track and it's going to deliver, hopefully beforehand, but at least, sorry, by 30 years, the target habitat value or biodiversity value.
Absolutely. I had a question for Leah as well here. There was a question specifically on the biodiverse score, which is optional, I think, for developers. Leah had to leave, unfortunately, earlier. But I think that Paris, Mattia, is also using this approach. They have this master plan, but they're also developing and sharing tools and testing out the acceptance before they actually enforce the use of these tools.
Absolutely. I would say that that in the case of Paris, the role of communities was crucial. We are assisting since many years the call for claiming back green space. Is it where also probably in Europe, okay, alongside probably Barcelona, and the role of nature in cities was very well understood by people at first. On the other hand, it was the first, I think, country that established in Europe a ministry for ecological transition. It was a long time ago, and it was supported by the best scientists in the country, and so we are really talking in a context of a state which is pretty much centralized, as opposed to Italy's, which is very, very much decentralized in terms of a role of regions in, for example, in urban planning and territorial planning. This, let's say, top-down organization in terms of scientific work and making the point on how to make this biodiversity and nature in city happen again was had a counterweight on the other side, or a prepared ground, I would better say, made by this widespread understanding of what does ecosystem service mean. So there was a clear point and a reclamation for and a claiming for this greening cities in connection with the multiple issues that the lack of green spaces create, mental, psychological health, but also I would say that this then pave a way for a different value proposition, because another point I would make is that the ethical, dimension of ecology or green redevelopment of cities is probably not enough to make this leapfrogging that we need after so many years of nature degradation. And this is a point in which ecologists, when you say there's a new market for ecologists, this new market for ecologists, biologists, agronomists, which have their own vertical depth, disciplinary depth, and I know how they work because they are real scientists. They need to deliver solid result. We are more integrated, but we need to have them, let's say, with a planning and design thinking mindset, to actually help us to make the point of the value proposition. The example of Napoli brownfield that we have in the suburb of the city, which are places of incredible natural value, are strangely only hosting nature-based solution because they had to be there, not because they could trigger different local added value chains and circular nature-based economic chain that create value in the local context. And this can be made for the biofuel dimension, for the biomaterial dimension, creating circular loops that also reconvert degraded contexts that were deprived by the shutting down of the industry. I mean, all the socioeconomic complexity you may think about in many Southern European contexts are also calling back for the need of people. So how do we connect these socioeconomic issues that are also creating illegality, corruption, and all this other with the need for nature? So the ethical standpoint is, of course, crucial, but we need to work on another level. We cannot depend on the willingness to adhere to ethical standards for the future. That's, for me, a crucial point.
Absolutely agreed, Mattia. Thanks.
That's interesting. And just to add to that, the Biodiversity Net Gain tool, the government has developed an environmental benefit tool that uses the information that you input into this new tool that then also looks at ecosystem services. It's still in development, it's still early days, but it's just kind of like, you're completely right. If we need the ecosystem services benefits to really sell kind of like why we're doing all this and get people on board. And so I think they're trying to kind of integrate that all together, but I think they're just waiting for everyone to get their heads around Biodiversity Net Gain before throwing this at them as well.
Excellent point. There is a request from Christina to involve Paris more in the discussion. Unfortunately, Leah had to leave early. There is a question there on small and large private companies, how they're involved in the process. So unfortunately, Leah had to leave. I don't know if you want to make a final remark, Sarah, Mattia, before we wrap up.
Sarah, or do you want me to?
You can go first.
Okay, no, well, my final remark it's really to have this more need, strengthen our alliances and really try to keep all the elements of value that we attribute to nature in cities in a one single environment that looks at the systemic interrelation of nature with many other sectors, which, while driver of major carbon emission, are also the driver of economic wealth in cities, and also, of course, of services upon which the life in cities depends upon. This means to also, attribute values in the mindset of people like planners and practitioners that in practice contribute to the physical transformation of the city itself. And where in most of cases we are seeing too much cases in which the first version, let's say, of a plan of a project seems to respond in a perfect way to all the goals and a best practice approach. But then there are too many cases in which, when after maybe 5 to 10 years after the first initial programming and planning, this physical transformation come to place, there are too many shortcomings that are fully justified by the many bureaucratic, economic conflict among stakeholders. There are so many motivations from which we can fail to deliver our strategic vision. And this is a call for a new business as usual approach in which the relevance of planning and design in the life of communities in cities requires to be backed by a whole new set of knowledge, which are still too much only the consultants for the architect and the designer and the urban designer, and not the actual planners and designer. So it's also a call for all science and practitioner of science of different science domains to come on board in the planning and design challenge. It's a different kind of work, but it's a work that desperately need to be open to these new competences. Otherwise, we will keep failing, having a very bold ambition, which are not penetrating in the daily life of practitioners and communities.
Thank you, Mattia. Sarah?
Yeah, so although Biodiversity Net Gain has its challenges for sure, and it's not by no means a perfect system, I think from my experience as a previously a consultant ecologist that's worked in the industry for over 10 years, I've seen lots of improvement in areas outside of ecology because we have this quantitative assessment that can create a shared language amongst developers, amongst landscape architects, hydrologists, everyone else involved in this development. This shared language means that we can work more cohesively into terms of delivering better quality landscapes in terms of nature. So I am seeing a difference. I'm seeing kind of conversations being had because there's a cost involved, and it can be marked up across against everything else that needs to be considered on development. I see changes in the design, and I see kind of drivers behind that as to why we need to deliver, retain a tree rather than fell it, or kind of retain grassland to enhance it to get those benefits of units. So you can kind of see the tangible difference. Because you can measure it, you can tangibly kind of see the difference, which I think is a real change to what we previously had. And I do think it's great that we have this 30-year kind of commitment to deliver on these habitats and make sure there's funding in place. Even though it's going to be interesting how that works, I think it's really good that we're kind of looking long term and acknowledging the fact that habitats work best when they're in place for a while. You don't just have them and then change up and kind of like keep changing the landscapes repeatedly outside its normal succession. It's really good that we're kind of like establishing habitats and trees and everything else so it can provide those ecosystem benefits and also improve over the years, because you see a tree and in its first few years it doesn't look like much, but give it a few tens or hundred of years, it's brilliant, but it needs that time to be able to kind of deliver on those aesthetic and ecological benefits. So it's going to be interesting to see how it develops further, and hopefully it's going to improve and people get more confident in its delivery and be part of it, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, let's commit then that we have another webinar in 5 years' time and reflect on what's happened in between. Thanks both. Thanks, Leah, even though you had to leave earlier, for the very interesting presentations and experiences you've shared. Heather, can I invite you maybe to wrap up the session and invite the audience to the next webinar 4?
Yeah, certainly. I wonder if we can share the PowerPoint again. That would be great. Indeed, this is fantastic, great discussions. I'm all in for the next 5 years webinar. Let's arrange that, but let's meet before the next 5 years. Indeed, so our next webinar in this series, of course, we are continuing, takes place on the 14th of May, so a week today at the same time, 10 till 12. And there we're going to be looking into municipal-owned land. I'm just going to take control and take us to the slide at the end so that you can see. All right, here we go. So we'll be looking into nature restoration on municipal-owned land. So we have confirmed the Director of Public Space Services from Barcelona metropolitan area on the sustainability protocol. So this is a set of guidelines on new buildings and public green spaces. So regulations for what can and can't be done. And we're also hoping to have The Hague also on the Binkhurst project. So this is a new kind of eco-design district, but that is to be confirmed. I would also say save the date for the next webinar, which is after that one, which is taking place on the 28th of May, same time, 10 till 12 CEST. And here we're looking at privately owned land. So how are cities working with citizens and with business to restore nature on privately owned land? One example we have is the Greening Beyond Borders example from Rotterdam, which is really interesting. It brings together citizens and business and looks at upskilling citizens, so working with citizens to restore nature on their privately owned land in gardens, providing them with the skills. So some really interesting case studies coming up. We'll share the link with you in follow-up as well. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Heather, and thanks everyone for being here. And I think I can now wish you a good rest of your day, and looking forward to see you in the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.